I'm Nick Whalen from RotoWire. In this video, we're going to talk about some high-risk, high-reward players, guys who could win you your league or guys you could be kicking yourself for drafting 2 months into the season. Whether you want to take that risk, ultimately it's up to you, but I'll do my best to lay out the case for each side. Let's get right into it. We got to start with Joel Embiid. He's a first-round pick, no question about it. Any discussion of high-risk, high-reward players has to start with Embiid. On a per-game basis, he was the #1 player in fantasy last season. He was #2 the year before. He was #3 the year before that. But in terms of total value, when you factor in games played, Embiid finished as the 42nd ranked player in Roto leagues a year ago. And of course, it's all about games played. And Embiid has been so dominant that we're not even asking him to play 75 games. 2 seasons ago, he missed 16 games. He was still a top 5 player. We just need him to avoid the long-term absence like last season when he missed 43 games. That's too many. If you're taking him in round 1, you're going to take a loss there. Embiid says he's lost weight. He says he's in better shape. That's all well and good, but he's never played more than 68 games in a regular season, so we need to be realistic here. There's also a chance that his counting stats aren't quite as outrageous this season as they were last year. The Sixers added Paul George. They have Tyrese Maxey. They have a well-built roster around Joel Embiid. With a mid-first round ADP, Embiid is a pretty appealing option if you have the 7th or 8th pick and he's still on the board and he's staring at you in the queue. I mean, he could be the #1 player in fantasy if things break right. There's no debate about that. It's all about your tolerance for risk when it comes to Embiid. If you're in win your league or bust mode, then take Embiid. If you want a safer option with the 7th overall pick, maybe go Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, Jason Tatum, players like that. You know what you're getting into at this point with Joel Embiid. If he misses 20-plus games and you take him in the first round, you're probably going to take a loss on that. If he misses 15 or fewer, then that's probably a victory if you're getting him with the 7th or the 8th overall pick. Next up, LaMello Ball of the Charlotte Hornets. Now, 3 seasons ago, in his second year in the league, LaMello played 75 games. He finished as an easy first-round value. He was one of the better values in all of fantasy that season. But since then, he's essentially been a sunk cost in each of the last 2 seasons. 2 years ago, he played only 36 games. Last year, it was even worse. Just 22 games played. That's 106 missed games over the last 2 years. So we know the risk profile here. LaMelo's had a series of ankle injuries. Some have been fluky, some have been not. But recurring injuries to the same body part, that's always going to be a concern as he moves forward in his career. The good news is, though, that concern is now baked into LaMello Ball's ADP. He's going around pick 25 in Yahoo leagues. He's outside the top 30 in ADP right now in ESPN. So you no longer have to take LaMello Ball at the 1-2 turn like you did last season, but it's still a reasonable investment. One way to look at it, the last 2 years were the worst case scenario. It can't possibly be that bad again, right? And I do subscribe to that to some degree, but we also can't expect LaMello to just go back to being a 75 game guy, something he's only done once in his career. If he gives you even 65 games of elite first round level production, to me, it's probably worth the risk considering where he's going in drafts. And for as frustrating as the injuries have been, LaMello was still a first-round value on a per-game basis last season. And again, if you're shooting for upside, there's really no other players in that 25 to 35 range of ADP who have a clear and proven path to round 1 value. As someone who was heavy on LaMello last season, I don't know if I'll be the one in my league stomaching that risk, but the upside with LaMello is unquestioned. All right, next on the list, Jordan Poole of the Washington Wizards. It's pool party time, for better or for worse. Now, the Wizards are the Wizards. Still not exactly sure what's going on out there with that roster in DC, but I will say that Jordan Poole will once again be one of the more polarizing players in all of fantasy basketball. It's hard to say a guy who's now going around pick 100 is a high-risk player, but we saw the downside with Poole early last season. He was being drafted as a top 50 guy in most leagues. Sometimes he was going quite a bit higher, and it was an abject disaster from the start. No question about that. However, lost in all of those Shaq and a fool moments early on was the fact that Poole actually turned in a surprisingly solid second half, especially in terms of fantasy production. After the All-Star break, Poole put up 21 points, 6 assists, 3 rebounds, over a steal per game, almost 3.5 made threes per game. And he shot 91% at the free throw line and 44% from the field. He actually ended up finishing as a top 75 guy season long in 8-cat roto leagues. Now, that's partially because, unlike the other players on this list, Poole does not miss games. He's played 76, 82, and 78 games over the last 3 seasons. So for as much volatility as he may have statistically game to game, he makes up for it by actually being available almost every night. That's not something you can say about many players in the NBA right now. Poole's ADP is now well outside the top 100 on some host sites. He's at 117 in ESPN leagues. He's still a risk because he's Jordan Poole and because it's the Wizards. But at that price, I'm actually more than willing to buy in on a Jordan Poole resurgence. To me, there's not a ton of downside there. If things really go south, you could just cut him and move on. Unlike last season when you invested that 4th or 5th round pick and you kind of felt like you had this obligation to see it through. I think Jordan Poole can essentially be the player that he was last season. And if you're taking him at 40th overall, yeah, that's a disappointment. But if you're getting him at 115, I think he actually ends up being a pretty decent value. Before we get to the final 2 players on our list, please give this video a like if you're enjoying it. And again, make sure you're subscribed to the RotoWire YouTube channel. Really appreciate that. We're going to keep bringing you a ton of great content leading up to opening night. We're going to bring you a ton of content through the NBA season. You can find all of our podcasts live and archived on the YouTube channel as well. Next up on our list of high risk, high reward players, Zion Williamson of the New Orleans Pelicans. Zion is kind of a perennial free space on any list of high risk, high reward options. And to his credit, he got his body in order last season. He played 70 games, but obviously he only played 29 games the year before. He missed the entire 21-22 season, and he had plenty of injury issues in his first 2 games in the league. So we're not totally out of the woods here in terms of Zion Williamson's health risk. Even if you're optimistic about Zion staying healthy, we do need to acknowledge that his scoring was down last season. His rebounding took a dip. He still hasn't come anywhere close to being the level of defender that we thought he'd be coming out of Duke. He did give you over a steal per game last season. There's some progress there, but he's still not really blocking shots at a high rate, and he hasn't demonstrated any improvement whatsoever as a three-point shooter. In roto leagues, that's a huge hit, essentially taking a 0 in the three-point category. So we're working with somewhat of a limited stat profile for Zion, and while he has gotten better at the free throw line, he's still not a plus in that area, considering he takes 7 or 8 per game and shoots only 70%. With that said, this is the first time really in his entire career that he's had a full, healthy offseason to train and prepare. So I think there's reason for optimism here. Now, the Pelicans did bring in DeJounte Murray. They have a bit of a logjam on the wing with Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram. Still think there's a chance they can move Ingram at some point. So Zion doesn't necessarily have this clear path to, being the number 1 option, having the sky-high usage rate. There are other players who are going to command touches, but we have seen what he's capable of when he's locked in. Late last season, when Ingram was banged up, Zion put up 26, 7, and 5, almost 3 combined blocks and steals per game over a 20-game sample. But still, he finished outside the top 65 in roto leagues last season. So if you're taking him with, say, the 40th or 45th overall pick in your draft, still, he finished outside the top 65 in roto leagues last season. So if you're taking Zion with, say, the 40th or 45th overall pick in your draft, you're not only banking on him staying healthy, you're also banking on him taking a meaningful step forward in terms of the counting stats. Could it happen? Absolutely. Yeah, it's in the cards. Zion's one of the best talents in the NBA. I do think we maybe see more of Zion at center this season. I mean, the Pelicans really have nobody at center as of right now. We'll see if they address that before opening night. We did get a preview of that late last year. We saw more Zion at the 5. That could help his blocks and his rebounding. But Zion could also replicate last year's stat line and play 45 games. I don't think that would shock anyone. Like Embiid, like LaMello Ball, you know what you're signing up for when it comes to Zion Williamson. He is the definition of a high-risk, high-reward player. The 5th and final player on our list, Ja Morant of the Memphis Grizzlies. The risk-reward profile for Morant, it's pretty straightforward. When he's healthy, engaged, available, he's one of the most electrifying players in the NBA. It's that simple. But he's played 70 total games over the last 2 seasons. He missed 25 games the year before, and he's never played more than 67 games in a single season. Beyond that, there's always been somewhat of a disconnect between Ja Morant's real-life profile, his real-life value, and his fantasy value, especially in roto leagues, where he's never finished as better than the 30th overall player on a per-game basis. Now, Morant gives you excellent scoring. He gives you great assist production, great rebounding numbers for a point guard, but he's not a high steals player. He's a below-average free throw shooter for a guard, and most importantly, he's a low-volume three-point shooter. He did raise his volume from 3 a little bit last season, but we're dealing with a very limited sample, and Morant has shot under 30% from deep over the last 2 years combined. So we need to see it in practice before I fully buy in. The Grizzlies also had the year from hell health-wise last season. So Morant comes back to a pretty loaded roster alongside Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, got a rookie big man in Zach Edey. Morant is clearly still the guy in this Grizzlies offense, but Jackson, Bane, these are high-level secondary options who are going to command their touches. I love Ja Morant in real life. I hope he stays healthy. I hope the Grizzlies bounce back from a health perspective. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA to watch. But in roto leagues especially, I'm not sure I'm spending a top 30 pick on him. In ESPN, his ADP is currently sitting at 15. That is just way too rich for my blood. There are still too many risks when it comes to Ja Morant.